Hello! Just recently I was out with friends and I flew my wing. It was a really windy day and it was a really tiny wing, so it blew around everywhere, but it still made me think, you know what, I'd like to do some more of this. So when Banggood said, hey, anything you're interested in, I found there was on their page a little DLG. I say little, about 1.2 meters, from a company called Dancing Wings. I said, gonna try that out? And they said yes. And here it is. And yes, I am concerned about the fact that this got somewhat dented in the mail, but I quickly checked it out and it doesn't look like it got injured, which is important because this thing is like balsa wood and bits of, you know, very thin covering. So let's get out of the box and see what we get. There's two versions of this, the almost ready to fly and the base kit. The difference being that this should have two 9-gram servos in. I'm presuming then the servos go for the tail and rudder rather than any ailerons. Yeah, the interior box, or the internal box, got somewhat squished down here as well. So yeah, I was very concerned. But taking it apart, we seem to have a bag, this big yellow bag here, and unfortunately on her we've got the tail and vertical stabilizer. We've got the two wings which look on her very lightweight, as you can imagine. We got some stickers, we got an instruction manual for assembly, then we seem to have some sort of carbon spar. In here some, I'm going to say bits, including some weights. I'm guessing that's nose weights to make sure we've got the right weight there. And then servo rods. Not sure about them being all curved like that, but we'll see how that goes. That was that box. In box number 2. So you can see what that carbon rod's for now. Rather than a carbon spar, it's going to come out there. And in here we've got sort of more balsa. I cannot see any servos. I can see where the servos go, but we can't see any unless they are well hidden somewhere. Ain't no servos in here. I've been diddled. Oh well, let's put it together and see how it looks for starters. Fortunately, I do have some servos around. Well, already a little bit confusion on number 1 where it talks about assembling these bits with a paper hinge and pushing them on. The paper hinge here already seems in. And I've just wiggled that around to make sure we've got some movement. Can't come out, so I think that's already been assembled. So I think I should move on to attaching these bits. H2, D3, D2, see what happens there. Okay, I think that's stage 1 done. I think I'll get this around the right way because it looks like the carbon rod goes on there and sort of slots in, and then there is, you can just see a kind of slot. I was a bit confused by this at first because it looked like that was splitting, but it looks like if we just cut that, we'll be able to slide the rod into there. And then you have to stick a bunch of stuff. So when looking at these bits where you join the tail and the vertical stabilizer together, it's a bit difficult to tell exactly which way it goes up. But I think going by reference pictures is this, where this is the bottom. So the tall part of the vertical stabilizer is over there. I now have to glue that in and then glue the bit onto there. With it tells you about using thin versus not so thin CA, with which I don't have multiple types of CA, so we'll see how we do. Okay, we're stuck on in, so let's proceed. Okay, when I did that little spin last time, you may have noticed something, and that's the fact that I had the tail on the wrong side. So there's a bit of a mess here now, because I had to remove that. I'm sure I could have made it work with it like that, but I managed to get that off, so that's restuck. You also see we've got these things on. If you look very closely, there are some holes that the push rods go through. These are not glued in right now, and they're very difficult to get on. I've also gone ahead and glued in this bit, and I took a long time trying to work out if I had that straight. I think I do. I had to sort of do it by eye, but I think we're okay and ready to move on to the next stage. Now, at this point, you're probably thinking, hey, you've jumped ahead a bit, haven't you? And the answer is, well, yes and no. Before I went and stuck stuff down, I wanted to make sure the centre of gravity was right. You see it mentioned here, 95mm back from the leading edge of the wing. What we've got there is, it basically ties up with that little spar just there. And if we we go ahead and just put our fingers under there, it is just about holding correctly. But the only reason that holds correctly is in here I've got just about all the weights they gave me, the battery, the servos, and because of my size of the receiver, I wanted to put that back there, so I wanted to make sure, it would actually work. But yeah, getting the nose weight in, there's a little cuttable section just here, so we can do the nose weight slightly differently. Yeah, it's a bit weird, and I haven't finished any of this stuff yet, so I'll come back and start sorting that out. I just needed to know it would work in theory. Right, so if we rewind things a bit, we've got the two servo rods here, and what you have to do, because you've got a Z-bend on this side, you've got to push them in here through these. Now what we've had to do is mount these little things on the pole, or the tail boom, and they've got two holes in them, and you've got two holes here and here coming along to where the servos go. You have to push them in from that end because the Z-bends don't go through, and we have to put a manual bend in here when we fit the servos in. Obviously they can't do both ends because it wouldn't push through the things. These need gluing in. These were a pain in the ass to get in. They are practically the same size as the spar, and they're made out of this really weird material. You can just see the two little servo horns there, which I have to fit in a sec before I do anything else. And these came out of here. I don't know what material it is. It's flexible, but it creates a lot of horrible dust on your hand when you do it. Underneath here, you can hopefully just see that we've got a partial cut just here to mount one of those servo horns, and another one here. So I need to fit those in, get the Z-bend in, get the servos in, and do a manual bend there. Now it actually says stick the servos in first, but I thought that was more difficult about then getting that wire in. So I'll see how it goes. Okay, so this is it with servos stuck in. What I've got here is my receiver, and just by the side of it is a little ESC, so I'm running the servos from the back. And I found an interesting problem. First off, I should say that this is the battery that's going to fit nicely, but I don't know if it's going to weigh enough. This is the battery which is kind of a bit of an effort to fit, but at least weighs more. But let me show you what happens if I just plug this in. You will notice that we get a light on the receiver, and that normally means, hey, I've connected to your radio. But you haven't connected to my radio because my radio is not on. It's a really weird issue, and I had to ask the Discord group for ELRS to find out what's going on. And it seems to be that sometimes servos will make the pins go high. So what I found I could do is if I unplug my two servos, then power it up, you can see the LED starting to flash, and at that point I can plug the servos back in, and it'll be okay once I turn the radio on. Now we did have this tiny little thing, and the idea was we made a 90-degree bend on the servo rod and put that in place to stop it falling out. They were hard to fit, so I actually made myself a little Z bend, which seems to be okay. Okay, so we've gone and powered on, and we have the radio, so I can actually move the servos, and there's a few little problems there. Elevator wise, not a problem. However, if we look at the rudder and the servo rod, you can see how that rod bends out. So I'm going to need to put something here just to hold that in. So if something is holding it better there, it should work a little better and push against something. Perhaps one of these should have been closer up there, but I still don't think it would have stopped it bending. So those are the things I'm going to do. I'm going to get something to fix that, and then I'm going to start trying to balance this out. What I'm going to have to do is basically power this on, plug the servos in, then put the wings on before I can fly it, which is a little bit annoying, but there you go. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to fix the problem with the tail, put this battery in, open up this little thing here. This is just a very thin skin, so I can put some weights in. See, I can balance out with this smaller battery. If not, we'll try it with the larger battery, and eventually we can get to it. Okay, I brought out the electrical tape and I made myself a little loop of the non-sticky side and then loosely did some around it, and that has got me a lot better. It still wants to bend right at the end. It just needed thicker piano wire basically, but we seem to have more. I don't know exactly how much rudder I need. Probably not that much. It's like 90 degrees, so we'll find out how that goes. Right, now I'm going to try and balance it out, so got to get the wings in. So to put the wings together, you have this bit in the kit which goes into here and does exactly the same on the other side. When they're together, you see it's got this little sort of hook bit here, if it's going to focus. Yep, that is going to go into that little hole there. So the whole thing hooks under, and then we have two bolts that go into these, going down at sort of funny angles, which we've got the holes for here in the wings. So I'll stick the wings on and then we'll try and balance this thing out. The only thing about these screws is they're quite difficult to get lined up. So there's a lot of wiggle room, and you've got to just sort of, is that going on or not? That seems to be doing something there. So it's kind of a pain that I have to power it on and then put the wings on, because you can see that takes a while. Anyway, if I lift up where the balance point is with that little battery, you can see that it just tips back immediately. So a lot more weight in the front, so let's open that bit up. So as I said, if you just feel here, there is a soft part where it's just a bit of covering and nothing underneath it. So if we go ahead and open that bit up, basically you just get some tape and go over that, but that is our access port for putting some weights in. Okay, if we try it now, we are about balanced, just with the nose going slightly down, and this actually goes on nicely, which is a problem with the other one. I think this might still need a rubber band around it. I don't quite trust that magnet. In order to do that, what we had, we've obviously got our battery in this bit, two of these guys, and then just in front of the battery, if you can just see kind of inside, there's another 3 of those. So that is a total of like 25 grams, I think, which seems like quite a lot for that. The thing I've got left to do now is, if we have a look at this wing, there's a hole in it, and we've got this to go in it, so that's our launch. So I'm going right-handed, so yeah, thingy will be in that side. I just need to glue that in, and then we can think about maidening it. Hello, welcome to the field. I'm in a bit of a different place today. Normally I'd be over there, but the wind is coming from this direction, so really I need to be in the opposite corner. Now I would have stood over there, but I figured if the glider gets away from me and blows behind me, I haven't got much escape route, so this way I can sort of throw that way, sort of come around and hopefully back here. Here it is, carried it along, a little bit awkward, got this bit, the wings in the bag, which blows around in the wind. It is quite breezy today, and it's just peed it down with rain, something rotten. So hopefully that black cloud stays in the sky. Anyway, I'm going to get this made, because if you remember, I have to plug the battery, well, unplug the servos, plug the battery in, plug the servos back in, then put the wings on, and then we're ready to go. Just, you know, simple things. Okay, so we are built. The wind has obviously just come up and is now blowing it around like a crazy thing, but hey, it's called a wind runner, so what do you expect? A couple of little extra things I did. I put the graphics on. I'm using my GX12. This is because it's a bit lighter, and when I toss it, it's said to give like a 10% landing thing. So what I've done on SG is I can just hold that as it goes, and it just gives a little bit of up. So I'm just going to try, just first throw is just going to be a forward throw glide, then we'll we'll give it a bit more of a toss, and we'll sort of increase as we go. But just want to make sure everything holds together first and nothing falls apart. Well, I have to call it a slightly disastrous first launch. The wind got under it, took it straight up, and whatever the landing did, the receiver became unpowered, and that has caused me to need to now go and unplug everything and plug it back in again, which means taking the wings off again. Hooray! So the question is this just too windy? It's gusting up to about 10 to 15, I think. Or am I just too close to these trees? So I'm going to go out in the middle and give myself a little bit more room and see what I can do. Just with a small chuck again. Given the angle it went up, I will chuck it without the 10 degrees, I think. I left my GoPro running back where I was sitting, which gives me actual interesting view of how my froze looks and how the plane handled. But I'll show you what this looked like in a bit more close up because I took my Insta360 out there with me. So first thing to mention, the wind was bad. It got up and my camera went down twice. That's how bad it was. So perhaps it was too windy. But as you saw, I started off with these regular sort of single throws, and that wasn't bad, but the wind did get up more and more as I went. You will notice in these first throws early on, aside from the fact that I'm sometimes dunking it on the nose, that the elevator input seems very harsh. I didn't recognise it first off, but you'll see the plane sort of dip down and then almost go up to a stall sometimes because it was just too sensitive. What I finally figured out what I wanted was a slightly different rate on both the elevator and the rudder. So what I found I needed is absolute full rudder, because sometimes if this thing was going downwind and I tried to turn back into wind, it just wouldn't have it. It would start to turn and then blow back out. But what I needed was about 40 to 50% elevator with 100% rudder in order just to smooth it out. You can see it sort of stalling away and then recovering and then sort of being okay. So I stuffed it on the nose a good few times, and you can see here that I built up to a full discus throw. Some of these I was happier with than others. Sometimes I got, you know, like a good 30 seconds of flight going around me, and that made me happy. Other times it just went terribly wrong. The right way to throw a discus launch glider, I believe, and I'm not an expert on this by any means, is people throw it up in the air. They're looking for height. They want to go up and then they will sort it out as it comes down. Whereas in my case, if I threw it at too much of an angle, it would just end up going backwards over my head. So I was kind of throwing much more sort of forwards than upwards. There are elements of this where you can see the wing trying to penetrate the wind, and it just can't seem to do it. It just was basically flying backwards, and I couldn't do much about it. So here's an example of getting a bit too much angle, and the wing just gets caught and blown completely backwards before I really had a chance to do much about it. I'm guessing your pro level DLG will handle wind like that, because they're a completely different beast than these sort of very light balsa wood contraptions. But yeah, this one did not want to penetrate the wind. It was fun to fly though. When we had the odd moment when the wind dropped off a bit and I could throw it
and not fight with the wind too much. It was very chill. I always say I don't particularly like line of sight flying, but I like a DLG because it's a very sort of active line of sight flying. You're always doing something and throwing it back in the air and stuff like that, and that sort of thing is quite good fun. So I flew this for about 40 good minutes based on the huge amount of gigabytes I had on my Insta360. I think I had a 35 gigabyte file, and yeah, it's nice. I think it would be a lot more fun in calmer weather because I'd be able to sort of throw it up and, you know, not have to worry about it running off down the field. So it was a bit of a stressful 45 minutes or so, but I felt I was starting to get to grips with it, especially once I got my rates dialed in a bit better. Not that I didn't stop banging on the nose occasionally. There are a few things to mention in these clips here. One is, if you notice there's some splodges on the screen, this is after the camera fell over twice, and yeah, it bashed itself on the screen, so you got a couple of splodges. The other thing is, this is after my first bit of twiddling with the rates. I don't think it was final at this point because I kept going back and just adjusting and adjusting, but I think it feels, or at least seems to look, a little bit more gentle on the elevator. It's not sort of dipping down quite so much or going completely up into a stall when I'm trying to just pull up gently. So this was sort of towards the end of it, and it's starting to get good, although ironically the wind was getting worse and worse at this stage and became more difficult as we went. I don't think my throwing technique's particularly good. I'm not really getting much of a whip there, and as I said, I'm not launching this straight up in the air like many people would just because of that wind. I think it was alright. And the good thing is you don't have to be an expert to mess with these. You can just have a go, give it a whirl, and sometimes it will go horribly wrong. But these planes are fairly good at recovering from a stall, which is just as well because I did terrible things to it in this wind. Well, at that point we're going to stop, not because I wasn't having some fun throwing it. It was going okay sometimes, other times it was horrendous. But I feel the glider's starting to fall apart. The problem we've got is this no longer seems to be attached, so we're having a big wobble here. We've got some damage sustained around it, and I did find out that these things aren't in fact already glued in because they came out several times. Let's open it up to see what the issues are. Okay, so we have the answers. It seems like the two little prongs that were on there have come off, which would normally go, of course, into this hole. So that didn't happen, and we've also got, you see some outer damage here, but also the wood has snapped there, which is really causing the wings to plug along. So there is some repair work to do there. Balsa is not the same as foam, but we'll get it home, we'll see what we can do, and then we can conclude.
Okay, so this has been basically glued back together. It's a little bit unsightly there, but it's feeling as strong as the other side there. You see there's a bit of give in it, but there is on the other side. So that's good. There's no damage to this bit. That was all okay. Now, as far as the wings go, I found this in the fuselage, so that was no problem. That's been glued back on. It is an absolute weak spot, the way it's designed, but I built up some layers of glue, so that feels pretty good. The same thing couldn't be said of the other side, where I could not find it. So what I ended up doing is getting the base measurements and printing a little nubbin to stick on it, which seems like it shouldn't work, but that is pretty strong, as strong as the other stuff, and it fits together fine. So you can see there when the wings put together, they form this little thing which then goes into the hole, and that will stop any side-to-side movement on that bit. Not that I've actually got it screwed in. But yeah, everything's back to normal, ready to fly again on a slightly less windy day, hopefully.
There you go, all back together and working. So what did we think of that? Well, I want to touch on a few things, good and bad. I think overall it was an okay experience, and it's hard to judge because you just don't get a lot of DLGs. It seems to be a really niche market within RC. I know there's like really good DLGs, and they tend to be 4-channel models, obviously have ailerons, and they're made of like a single piece of like carbon spar running through, and they're very impressive and they're very expensive. So on the plus side, this is inexpensive. It's not the first DLG I had. I also had one from Hobby King about 10 years ago called the Mini DLG, which was very good and slightly cheaper. But of what I've seen, you can't seem to get stuff like this out there very easily. Obviously, it wasn't very good that this came without the servos. It was ordered as being with the servos. Obviously didn't come with it, so be careful. Not necessarily a Banggood fault, fault of the manufacturer for sort of labelling the box as one thing and not putting the servos in there. The other thing I wanted to highlight were the instructions. The instructions were pretty good, but they just needed a few more pictures. For example, I managed to get the tail round the wrong way because the pictures weren't very obvious about which way was on top and which way was underneath. They were just mixing it up. The other thing that I think really does need changing out is the piano wire for the servos. This bends when it pushes against something. So as you saw there, I put in my little extra piece of sticky tape basically to try and act as another thing to keep it from straying. So a thicker wire would do a better job there and it wouldn't bend so much. When it's looking at things this long, they are just absolutely huge, so they're going to be prone to bending. So either that or more of these little rods or some sort of structure to go through which would stop it being able to sort of bend outwards. Don't particularly like the way this thing attaches. I think there is a weak point here. If you stuff it onto the nose, then everything goes forwards. Those two little prongs are going to obviously break off very easily. Of course, many people wouldn't stick it on the nose as much as I did, but as this is very much a beginner learner type plane, I think you're going to crash it a lot. But that's kind of a bit of a warning. It's not like flying a foam plane. Foam planes will take a lot of punishment. They will stick back together very nicely. This is balsa and it just doesn't survive that sort of punishment as well. Now, we had problems with the servos and the receiver. That's nothing to do with this plane. That is an ELRS problem, and it seems to be dependent on the type of servos used. I say it's an ELRS problem. Perhaps it's a servo problem going into ELRS, but it's not a fault of this plane. So overall, I'm looking forward to flying it again. I'm looking forward to doing it in better weather and getting the hang of chucking it, and it's fun to fly it, essentially, when it's not blowing an absolute hoolie. Anyway, this has been the very catchy name of the Dancing Wings hobby, FDCG12 1.2 meter wingspan Windrunner discless launch glider, and I got it from Banggood, and the details are down there if you want to check it out yourself. Hope that review's been helpful. I'll catch you next one. Bye for now.
Well, you've made it to the end of the video, so thanks once again for watching. If you like what you saw, then please consider subscribing, and if you really like what you saw, then be sure to check out the link to my blog for a variety of ways in which you can help support this channel.